This CBC had an insane attack on a newspaper today, a newspaper called the Epoch Times. I've followed the newspaper for years. You can see their newspaper boxes on street corners in some of the big cities of North America. Of course, it being 2020, their biggest and best work is online. They have a lively website and they're getting really strong on video too. You'll recall that a couple of weeks ago they published this great documentary about the origins of the Wuhan virus, an investigative report into where the virus actually comes from. That video has been seen nearly 4 million times. And I was honored to interview the host and narrator of that documentary, Joshua Phillip. You might not know it, but the Epoch Times is Chinese in some ways. Joshua Phillip isn't, obviously, the documentary, the newspaper, they're in English. I don't know if you saw my noontime show today, but I talked at length about the paper edition that was delivered for free as a promotion to many households across Canada, including my own. I was delighted to come home the other day and see the newspaper in my mailbox. It truly told the other side of the story in very interesting ways. Stories like 10,000 fake Twitter accounts that the Communist Party of China uses to promote their propaganda, or the history of China's biological warfare plans, citing a 20-year-old speech by Secretary of Defense over there that really lays out their plans. Or the story I mentioned the other day that there are now 21 million fewer Chinese cell phone users, suggesting that there might be a vastly higher death toll in that country than let on. All of those are interesting stories. All are presented scrupulously accurately. Lots of factual basis. I really appreciated this part. It's a big timeline of how the virus spread and how Canada dithered. And it's one of the reasons why a newspaper can still really do a great job. I mean, you can't see this on your phone screen or your laptop. It really takes a gorgeous newspaper to see it right. Look at that chart. Anyways, I love the newspapers. Like I say, what a perfect antidote to the BS served up daily by Canada's media party. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between Canadian journalists and Chinese propaganda organs. They call concerns about the virus racist. They opposed stopping flights from China. They all said masks weren't needed, while China was quietly buying up 2 billion masks around the world and bringing them back home. So yeah, what a refreshing change to read something independent. I really like it. I've subscribed, by the way. The Epoch Times is interested in China, and it came by that interest honestly. Its founders were members of China's Falun Gong spiritual movement, which I would describe as a kind of Chai Chi. I know that's not really accurate, but that's sort of what it looks like to me. You can often see Falun Gong supporters in places like Vancouver doing exercises together in the park. Peaceful, friendly. They were once regarded as a friendly hobby by the Chinese Communist Party, something healthy, something positive, but then about 20 years ago, China criminalized Falun Gong as an illegal religion. Not only banning it, but, and this is terrifying, this is gross, but this is true, imprisoning their adherents and literally using them as forced donors of human organs for transplants, as in they would involuntarily, forcibly cut out organs and sell them to people who need transplants. Not just Communist Party high-ups in China, but desperate and unscrupulous foreign buyers of organs. China was literally killing prisoners and selling their body parts. In fact, it was a nonpartisan Canadian investigation that really put this on the human rights map a decade plus ago. So yeah, you can believe they have good reasons to be skeptical of China and worried about China and reporting on the crisis in China. And while they definitely come from their own strong point of view, they are very accurate and responsible journalists. I've never seen anything they publish being undone by claims of factual inaccuracy. And if they are exuberant in their criticism of China, well, let's call that a welcome antidote to the pro-China insanity in our own establishment from the top down.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China because their basic dictatorship.
Yeah, you need to add the Epoch Times to your media diet if you can. I subscribed. I'm really happy I did. So they're like us a little bit of the rebel. They're dissidents, except for they paid a much higher price. They're small, but they punch above their weight. And authoritarian governments, or at least one, China's authoritarian government, just hate them. In the US, they cover the news broadly, and given that Donald Trump himself has challenged China's world dominance, the Epoch Times is naturally more sympathetic to him than the rest of the Washington-based media party are. So the Epoch Times is criticized down in the States for not getting with the anti-Trump program of the rest of the journalists. Here in Canada, they've largely been ignored by our media party establishment until they started to criticize Trudeau's absurd pro-China stance. And even weirder, Patty Hajdu, the health minister, her pro-China propaganda. Like, remember what she said this?
There's no indication that the data that came out of China in terms of their infection rate and their death rate was falsified in any way. So I would say that your question is feeding into the conspiracy theories that many people have been perpetuating on the internet.
Did you hear that? Patty Hyde, who literally said she trusted the Communist Party of China and the propaganda they were feeding to the world through the World Health Organization, even though it's been debunked. And she actually called a reporter who dared to ask her about it, she called him a conspiracy theorist. Finally, I see other media are starting to catch up on this. Here's Evan Solomon.
February 17th, you said that the suspension of flights to and from China and closing the borders, and I'll quote you, was not effective at all as controlling the spread of the disease. You also said in the long term, they create a greater risk to public health. You also praised China as being very open. Were you wrong about that, Minister? And I think it's important to know that because we still got a long road ahead.
Well, I think, the praise that I offered China in the early days was based on their historic containment efforts. Don't forget there were, multiple millions and millions of Chinese people under essentially confinement, if you will, for a very long time. In fact, in some of those cities, people are just getting back to normal. And that was a public health measure that had never been seen before. Those containment efforts ultimately failed. And, I will point to the fact that I stand by the remarks on that I made.
I like Evan, he asked good questions. So the work done by Rebel News and by Epoch Times was having an effect. Oh, I think we did some heavy lifting. My video about Theresa Tam called firetam.com, that video has been watched more than 400,000 times now. That caused a reaction. And then we found this clip of Theresa Tam daydreaming about making us wear licenses and tracking bracelets and stuff. Did you see this?
If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken.
Yeah, that's crazy, but that's how China rolls, and Theresa Tam works for the China-run WHO. That's not a racial comment, it's a comment for who she works for. When Conservative MP and leadership candidate Derek Sloan repeated our points, well, it's just too much for the establishment. Our ideas were taking purchase. After ignoring us and the Epoch Times, they decided to fight back. They flipped out. Trudeau went nuts on it, rehashing the Communist Party of China talking points that anyone who disagrees with them is obviously racist.
We've seen a spike in anti-Asian violence in different parts of our country. In BC, an elderly man with dementia was shoved out of a store by an assailant that brought up remarks about COVID-19. We now have a Conservative leadership candidate that is asking for Dr. Tam to be fired and is accusing her, the WHO and China, of being in cahoots. What is your message to Canadians as they see this?
Intolerance and racism have no place in our country.
Yeah, that wasn't a real question by that reporter. It was a softball, puffball set up to the question, conflating an alleged racist assault with a political criticism. I wonder who wrote that question, the reporter or the PMO? Well, I don't care, and the Epoch Times doesn't care, and we both do our thing, and our readers like us for it. But Trudeau wasn't done, and the media party wasn't done. The CBC had ignored the Epoch Times more or less. But oh man, did they blow a gasket. I mentioned that I got this newspaper for free in the mail. I'm lucky, I loved it. Well, the CBC found 3 people in our country who didn't like this or thought they didn't like it. 2 were white liberals and 1 was a postal worker. They didn't like the criticism of the Chinese Communist Party. And so look at this disgraceful story in the CBC today. Racist and inflammatory. Canadians upset by Epoch Times claim China behind virus, made it as a bioweapon. Racist and inflammatory? Really? Canadians are upset? How many Canadians? All Canadians? Some Canadians? Who? Which ones? Canadians are upset, and the newspaper claimed that China created the virus as a weapon. Is that what the newspaper really claimed? Well, I told you that despite having some white journalists and their North American editions, including their Canadian edition being published in English, it's in its bones, it's a Chinese newspaper. It was started by Falun Gong democracy activists to tell the truth about China. It's like underground samizdat news sheets published in Poland under Solidarnosc in the 80s. It's like an underground resistance paper in France during German occupation during the Second World War. And they're calling this Chinese newspaper racist? Says who? Says Canadians? Canadians say it's racist, really? And did the Epoch Times really say that the virus was a biological weapon? Did they say that, as the CBC claims? Let's read some more, starting with the photo caption. A special 8-page edition of the Epoch Times was delivered to some households across Canada. Some Canadians who received it were put off by the newspaper's content, which one recipient described as racist and inflammatory. Submitted by Carol Harmon. I wonder who Carol Harmon is. The CBC never tells us. But the story's already changing, isn't it? So now it's some Canadians were put off by the content, and then we're told it was just, well, actually, just one person called it racist. That's funny, because that's not what the headline implied, right? I mean, I guess you really couldn't have a 5-alarm fire written by 3 CBC government journalists. Huge story. Couldn't really do it if your headline was accurate. One Canadian says she thinks the story could be racist. Who is that one person? Is she Chinese herself? Does she even know that the Epoch Times is Chinese? By any chance, this couldn't be, could it? Is that by any chance a know-nothing white liberal being professionally offended on behalf of Chinese people just to look woke, accidentally actually attacking a Chinese democracy newspaper just out of sheer ignorance? The CBC wouldn't do that, would they? They wouldn't do that. The Epoch Times, a free newspaper typically found in street boxes, is coming under fire for advancing a conspiracy theory about the origin of the coronavirus and putting it straight into people's mailboxes unsolicited. Whoa, you didn't say that, so it went straight in the mailbox, eh? That's quite something. I think that's actually how all mail goes in the mailbox. That's how magazines and newspapers and flyers and junk mail and government junk mail, I think it just goes all in there, solicited or unsolicited. It's shocking, and it's coming under fire. Some people say, Canadians say, coming under fire. These are the giveaways that it's not real news. People on the internet are saying. This is all just backfilling for the government journalist's own point of view. This is bad. Now dress up our pro-China opinion about it as a news story. Just find someone to say something. Some Canadians who received it by mail and a postal carrier who says he is forced to deliver it are angry over a special 8-page edition of the paper exploring the idea that the virus that causes COVID-19 was created as a biological weapon and arguing it should be called the CCP virus, a reference to the Chinese Communist Party. Really. A postal carrier is angry that he's forced to deliver mail. Yeah, mate, you're not forced to deliver mail. You just chose to do that as your job. So you're only forced to deliver mail in the same way a taxi driver is forced to give people rides, or a waitress is forced to give people food. It's what you said you wanted to do for a living. If you don't want to deliver mail, why did you become a mailman? And hang on, you're not reading people's mail, are you? Are you reading people's mail? Is that why you're bravely staying confidential, why you bravely take a stand? Because you're a bit of a snoop? Or is it because you're just so painfully stupid? You forgot what your job is to deliver the mail whether you like it or not. Or is it that you have a collateral interest maybe? Maybe if your name were published, you'd be revealed as a liberal activist or a Communist Party supporter or a Trudeau supporter, or maybe the brother of a CBC journalist. I don't know. And thus we could understand the real source of your censorship impulse. Who knows? One branch of the government, the CBC, is reporting that another branch of the government, the Post Office, is mad that a private newspaper is criticizing the government, Trudeau's government and China's government. Yeah, that's perfect CBC accountability journalism. They won't hold Trudeau or Haidu or Theresa Tam accountable. They'll go after a grassroots newspaper published by Chinese democracy activists. Very brave. Here, let me read some more. Lisa Armstrong in Kelowna found a copy in her rural mailbox. That's when I got annoyed or suspicious. It's like, why is this in my mailbox? You expect to see those kind of things online on social media, she said. It did seem to allude to conspiracy theories like, maybe it was manufactured, this virus was manufactured in the lab. Well, no, we know scientifically that's just not true. Okay, so that's quoted authoritatively. Who is Lisa Armstrong, who the CBC trusts to make scientific judgments from Kelowna as to the source of the virus in Wuhan? I don't know. They don't tell us again. Is it this young lady who specializes in making websites. I don't know, she seems quite nice. The CBC doesn't tell us which Lisa Armstrong it is, and I think that's the point. They just found someone on the internet willing to say what they themselves wanted to say about this article but couldn't justify. So let's go to Lisa from Armstrong. But look at that language. It did seem to allude to conspiracy theories like, maybe it was manufactured, this virus was manufactured in the lab. Yeah, no, I've read this newspaper cover to cover. I loved it. Something the CBC doesn't actually let you do. They don't link to it, so they won't let you check for yourself. But this quote, they quote Lisa Armstrong from Kelowna, paraphrasing this. Here's what it actually says right on the front page, actually. There is understandable concern about the activities of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, China's only P4 lab, one meant for working with easily transmitted pathogens that can cause fatal illness. As the official narratives offered for the source of the virus have been disproven, questions have been raised about whether the CCP virus leaked from the institute. That's it. It doesn't say it was manufactured there, that it leaked from there. They were maybe studying it, and there's no doubt there were viruses there. It doesn't say that it was manufactured. It asks if it even came from there. It doesn't give an answer to the question. In fact, the only conspiracy theory they publish is in the very next line, where they talk about the Chinese Communist Party and their conspiracy theory that the virus was created by America. The CBC just lied by republishing the lie of Lisa Armstrong from Kelowna, who wasn't even quoting it. And the CBC won't link to this to let you check. This is a smear, a hit job. Classic CBC, dishonest, unethical, sloppy, false, and paid for by Trudeau, by you. Then the CBC quotes some Canadian virologist who says he thinks the virus was not engineered. Again, something the Epoch Times newspaper does not say. But then this. Armstrong was also worried the issue's anti-communist party messaging could inflame racial tensions in Canada during the pandemic. Okay, got it. So this white liberal from Kelowna, I assume this is the same Lisa Armstrong from Kelowna, because the CBC doesn't tell us who she is. So she says that an anti-communist message would inflame racial tensions. Got it. So a white girl says that Cindy Gu, the Chinese publisher of the Epoch Times, Cindy Gu's whipping up racial tensions by opposing the dictatorship that rules over her home country. Got it. And I'm guessing that Germans who didn't like the Nazi Party, they were also whipping up anti-German sentiment. Is that right? Only a white liberal CBC hack would publish that criticizing the Communist Party of China is racist, because only a white liberal hack at the CBC would conflate communism with being Chinese. That's so lame. That's racist. Look at this, another CBC expert. A sociology professor says the Epoch Media Group is affiliated with the Falun Gong movement, a religious group that began in China and was declared illegal and a cult by the Chinese government in 1999. Its followers say the Chinese government persecutes them and oppresses their religious rights. Whoa, look at that wording. The CBC will not actually acknowledge that the Falun Gong is persecuted. They won't accept it as a fact. They'll just say it's something that Falun Gong followers say. Really? Jews say that the Nazis killed some of them in what they call the Holocaust. So Jews say it. Well, did it happen or not? Does the Chinese Communist Party persecute the Falun Gong or not? Why is the CBC saying, well, Falun Gong members say it? Why? Did the CBC just reduce this to a rumor? Do you see how the CBC is reducing this, diminishing what the Chinese communists did? Research that the CBC itself won't do. It's a fact, an incontrovertible fact, corroborated and proved repeatedly that in fact the Falun Gong was persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party. The CBC is literally deodorizing the Chinese communist torture and organ harvesting of the Falun Gong just to own a newspaper freebie insert that embarrassed their boss, Justin Trudeau. Imagine working on this CBC smear. There's three journalists who worked on this. Imagine how low you'd have to be to do this and call yourself a journalist, just to curry favor with Trudeau. This is just one step above Holocaust denial, seriously. Falun Gong members claim they were persecuted. No, they were murdered en masse. And then the CBC quotes another expert who tells us that it's a peculiar trick of dictators to try to get people to distrust their governments. Really? That actually sounds more like a democracy than a dictatorship. Let me quote. Wardle says people who read the special edition of the Epoch Times may not be completely convinced about its findings, but will have been left with questions about what their governments are telling them. Oh my God, don't let that happen. That is a technique of disinformation actors who want people to question as much as possible authoritative sources, she said. Well, you can't do that. Don't question authority. Ultimately, you're no longer going to your trusted news site or the World Health Organization or your government even for information. You're left thinking, I can't trust anybody. Imagine that. A Canadian not trusting the UN's World Health Organization, which is run by China. Imagine someone not trusting Trudeau's government. Why? We can't let that happen, can we? That's really the crux of this whole thing. The Epoch Times criticized the government, and so they have to be stomped on by the government broadcaster and anyone they can get to give them a quote. And that bizarre peeping Tom mail carrier. It was an article about a possible bioweapons link to coronavirus that set off alarm bells for a Toronto mail carrier when he saw the special edition appear in his mail station on Friday. CBC News is not naming the carrier because he is concerned he could lose his job with Canada Post. They're saying the coronavirus is part of a biowarfare agenda by the Chinese people. That's over the line for me, he said. I saw the headlines on the thing, and my heart sank because I thought the world right now is full of fear and confusion. The last thing that people need is this kind of hatred. Well, that's a double lie there. The Chinese people, no. They were quoting the Chinese Communist Party. I have the article right here. The headline is China's bioweapons ambitions. And they didn't say that at all. It's an article clearly marked commentary, where a journalist goes through that speech by that Chinese defense minister years ago that outlines China's plan that they believe in bioweapons as the best way to fight America, asymmetrically, as in it's easier for them to do than to spend tens of billions of dollars on aircraft carriers to match America. It's a historical treatment of a speech that was given years ago by the Communist Party's defense minister. They absolutely didn't publish the lie that this postal worker says, that it was a bioweapon by the Chinese people. No, the Chinese people published this newspaper criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. Just like the CBC was lying when they said what Lisa from Kelowna says. And again, the CBC does not link to the article for you to check for yourself. They surely know what they're doing, but they have deceived you by not correcting this peeping Tom mailman, by not correcting Lisa from Kelowna. Like I say, this was a hatchet piece, and the CBC just needed some people to say what they needed them to say. I love that cowardly weirdo who's reading everyone's mail and tattling to the state broadcaster about it. He'd fit right in China, wouldn't he? I love that the CBC is treating him like some major whistleblower. He's just a weirdo, coward, peeping Tom. Just like the CBC state broadcaster would fit in with the People's Daily. This is so gross. I reached out to Cindy Gu today. She pointed out that most people in the comment section on the CBC website were tearing this hit job to shreds. I have no doubt the CBC will soon shut down their comment section, Chinese Communist Party style. And Cindy sent me this rebuttal, and I'm so glad she did, and we'll publish the link to this on the website. I want you to read it for yourself. It's too long for me to go through now. CBC intentionally excludes crucial facts about Epoch Times and our coverage of Beijing's cover-up of virus outbreak. I like that she fights back, don't you? Maybe our Conservative Party MPs might try it one day. It's an exhaustive rebuttal, and it's damning, and it includes a copy of Gu's letter to the CBC hacks before publication, 90% of which the CBC omitted or buried deep down in the story. The very first point in Gu's response that the CBC either ignored, because otherwise how could they have that racism headline, or pushed way down when it says this is the letter Cindy Gu sent that was never incorporated. Hi, Katie. Thank you for the inquiry. The Epoch Times was founded by Chinese immigrants in North America who fled communist persecution in their home country. All of our editors and reporters in China were arrested, with some enduring long prison sentences and brutal torture. We have connections in China with people who provide exclusive information that we report on. Wow. Imagine getting that email back and still going on with your hit job. Imagine burying that deep in the story or omitting it. Just to smear Cindy Gu as racist, smear her team as racist. Imagine how low you have to be to do that. That is the disgusting CBC. They are as low as the Chinese Communist Press. They are allies with the Chinese Communist Press, just like Trudeau is, just like Patty Hajdu is. I'm going to talk more about this on my noon hour show tomorrow. It's so infuriating, and I'm only half started. But never forget. Justin Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster hates you, so they lie to you, and they lie about you. And the CBC would, if they would be so deliberately deceptive about saintly victims of Chinese torture and persecution, imagine how they would treat mere you if you ever crossed their man, Justin Trudeau. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.